They sneered at me at the gate, mocking my cheap seat like it was proof I didn't belong. I tried to swallow the shame, wishing the carpet would swallow me instead. But then, over the loudspeakers, came an announcement no one expected, and it silenced the entire terminal. The terminal at JFK buzzed with the restless rhythm of departure, rolling suitcases, the metallic chime of boarding announcements, the hiss of espresso machines feeding early flights. Families clustered around charging stations, business travelers tapped laptops, and kids sprawled on the floor with tablets glowing against their faces. I sat at gate 34, ticket clutched too tight in my hand. My in-laws loomed beside me, dressed like their flights were fashion shows. My father-in-law checked his Rolex every few minutes, sighing as though time itself was late. My mother-in-law's perfume carried sharp notes of judgment, the kind that lingered even when she didn't speak. But she spoke plenty. "So, row 32, huh?" she said, her lips curling as she scanned my boarding pass. "Back with the crying babies and the restrooms. How fitting," her husband chuckled. "At least he's on the plane, for now." Their laughter was small, polite enough not to draw stares, but it carved deep anyway. Around us, other passengers adjusted earbuds, pretending not to hear, but I felt their awareness. Humiliation travels fast in public spaces. I pressed the paper tighter, the ink smudging under my thumb. My wife, Emma, sat between us, her shoulders tense, her eyes darting like she was trapped between two worlds. She hadn't defended me. Not yet. Her silence felt heavier than their sneers. The boarding area filled with the usual chaos. A harried mother juggling a stroller, a businessman muttering about delays, a teenager snapping selfies against the window. All of it blurred at the edges because my in-laws' voices had anchored the humiliation right in my chest. "You should have upgraded," my mother-in-law continued, casually twisting the knife. "Or maybe you couldn't afford it." The words hit harder than turbulent. I opened my mouth, but nothing came. The gate agent called pre-boarding. A line formed, neat and smug with priority tag. I stayed seated, holding my row 32 like it was evidence in a trial I was already losing. And then, crackling through the loudspeaker, came a new voice. Not the gate agent, not routine. The kind of voice that turns a busy terminal into a listening room. "Ladies and gentlemen," it began, smooth but commanding, "before boarding begins in full, I'd like to make an announcement." The crowd stilled. Even the children looked up. And when the voice gave its name, when it said CEO, the air shifted, sharp and electric. My in-laws froze. For the first time all morning, their sneers slid away. The PA cracked again, softer this time, as if the speakers themselves were taking off their hats. "Good morning from Terminal 4, the voice said, warm and clipped, the kind of tone people practice before mirrors. "This is Daniel Kerr, CEO of Eastward Air. I'm on site at JFK today visiting crews and customers. Before we begin boarding at Gate 34, I'd like to share a brief announcement with all passengers." Heads lifted like prairie grass in a breeze. People took out one earbud. The gate agents traded quick glances, the kind that say, "This is not a drill." Even the espresso machine seemed to hush between hisses. "Air travel is supposed to move people," Kerr continued, "not just bodies and seats. People, with reasons. Over the past year, we've listened to your story. Caregivers crossing the country overnight. Students flying on standby to hold a grandparent's hand. Parents separated from kids because of a seat map. Folks doing their best at the back of the plane while the world tries to measure them by row number." A ripple ran through the chairs, small nods, a few soft laughs that weren't quite laughs. My mother-in-law shifted, crossing and uncrossing her leg. Perfume and disapproval moved with her. "At Eastward, we're launching an initiative called Carry Each Other," Kerr said. "It's simple. We're training our teams to spot acts of consideration at the gate and during boarding, seat swaps so families can sit together, patience with stressed travelers, help offered without being asked. We're recognizing those moments with thank yous that actually mean something, fee waivers, miles, and, when we can, upgraded seats." "Upgrade," my father-in-law muttered, like the word owed him back pay. The crowd leaned closer without moving. People knew corporate speak when they heard it, but this felt less varnished. Maybe because the voice didn't rush. "Sometimes," Kerr went on, The right seat isn't a row number. It's the posture you take toward the people around you. He paused, and the terminal did too. We'll be piloting the program across a handful of flights this month, starting right here. The gate agent, an older woman with a silver pixie cut and a radio clipped high, pressed her lips together to hide a smile. She tapped a second agent on the shoulder and pointed to a screen that passengers couldn't see. Beside me, Emma's fingers worried the strap of her tote. She glanced at me and then at her parents, like someone trying to translate 3 languages at once. "This is good, right?" she whispered. "Depends who it's for," my father-in-law said. "Companies don't do good, they do PR." "Dad," Emma warned. Quiet, but it was there. Kerr kept talking. "We've also asked our teams to recommend passengers they've seen show up for others. Today, this hour. If you're called, it's because someone here noticed you making our job easier by making this place kinder. You didn't ask. You didn't film it. You just did it." A little thrill ran through the cluster of pre-boarders lined up near the stanchion. A man in a suit straightened his posture. A college kid removed his headphones entirely. A toddler clapped because clapping is a toddler's native language. "Gate 34, Kerr said. "We have a few recognitions." The silver-haired agent stepped to the mic with a paper in her hand that looked less like a list and more like a note somebody had scribbled in a hurry. She smoothed it with her palm. "Thank you, Mr. Kerr," she said, eyes shining. "We'd like to thank a passenger who, this morning, helped a mom collapse a stroller while she juggled a car seat and a boarding pass. Sir in the navy hoodie, row 20 on your boarding pass. You're moving to 7C. We appreciate you." A spatter of applause answered. The hoodie guy lifted his hand, bewildered, and the terminal grinned at his confusion like we all owned a piece of it. "Second," the agent continued, "to the woman who offered her outlet and then sat on the floor so the oxygen concentrator could charge. Ma'am, 10A is yours." My mother-in-law fidgeted, the corners of her smile stiff. "Cute little gift." Marketing. My father-in-law made a show of checking his watch. "We're burning daylight." I watched the silver pixie cut scan the room again, eyes doing math no one else could see. Her radio crackled. Whoever was on the other end must have been smiling too. The agent looked down at her paper, then up, past the pre-board cluster, past the priority line, past the neat divide of ropes and carpet, toward the row of seats where we sat, trying to blend in with our embarrassment. "One more," she said, and something in her tone made everyone lean. Emma's hand found my wrist, sudden and warm. The squeeze said what her silence hadn't. "I've noticed, even when I didn't say it out loud," the agent continued, slower. "To the passenger who arrived early and quietly asked to move back. Back, not forward, so a dad and his 8-year-old could sit together on Flight 218 earlier this morning. Our team submitted your name. You didn't leave your contacts, but you're still at this gate." I blinked. The room tilted. The memory flickered alive. An hour before my in-laws arrived, a red-eyed father and a small girl with hair like dandelion fluff. The father juggling hope and a boarding pass. Me handing over my aisle seat near the front and walking myself to row 32 because the gate agent couldn't force a swap. No big speech, no witness, just a choice that felt like paying back a kindness I needed when I was 8. Emma's fingers tightened. "Was that—" "Shh," my mother-in-law hissed, as if being thanked in public were a sin. The agent shaded her eyes to cut the glare from the window. "We didn't catch your name," she said, smiling toward our section as if the smile were a flashlight. "But we can describe your shirt. Gray. Nighthawks Running Club." I looked down at my chest, like it might belong to someone else. The logo was right there. Faded hawk, cracked letters, years of laundromats. A murmur ran through the chairs near us, the pleasant kind that tastes like coffee instead of gossip. My father-in-law opened his mouth. Nothing came out. My mother-in-law's lips parted and then disciplined themselves back into a line. "If that's you," the agent said, "would you come to the counter for a quick thank you?" Emma didn't wait for me to choose. She stood, tugging my sleeve like we were late for homeroom. My knees felt like borrowed furniture when I followed her toward the rope. People made way without being asked, the way they make way for a wheelchair or a stroller or a person carrying something fragile in both hands. At the counter, the agent's smile arrived before her word. Up close, I could see little salt crystals of stress dried at her hairline. "You made my whole shift easier," she said, voice low enough to belong to conversation instead of ceremony. He was shaking. She was counting. "When you moved, I didn't have to make a federal case of it." I tried to joke, happy to help, but what came out was just air, the kind that fogs glass. On behalf of Eastward Air and our CEO, she used the corporate line, but her eyes stayed human. "We'd like to offer you an immediate seat change. 2, actually. 2, Emma echoed, surprised. "If you're traveling together," the agent said, "we're moving you to row 5, bulkhead, extra space. And," she lowered her voice and angled the mic away, "we're waiving your bag fees." Behind us, the terminal rustled like a forest after rain. It wasn't the gasp the title of a viral video would promise. It was quieter. But in a gate, quiet is loud. Emma swallowed, eyes bright in a way that brought her back to 16, the year I knew she saw me. "Thank you," she said, almost a bow. My mother-in-law stood now, halfway between her seat and the rope, unsure whether to be outraged or included. My father-in-law made a show of stepping aside to let someone pass who didn't need the space. The agent slid 2 new boarding passes across the counter, row 5A and 5C, then held my old pass a beat longer. "Keep it," she said. "Some folks think rows measure work. I've seen better measurements." Kerr's voice returned one last time, as if he'd been watching for the right beat. "Gate 34, thank you for helping us launch Carry Each Other," he said. "We'll never be perfect, but we can be less cruel." A soft huff of laughter traveled through the area, the laugh people use when they've been caught doing something ordinary, and it turns out to matter. "Boarding will begin momentarily," the agent announced, reclaimed by script. "Pre-boarding for families with small children and those needing extra time." We stepped back from the counter with our new passes, and a dozen sideways glances brushing our shoulders. Emma squeezed my hand again, tight enough to say, "I'm with you." My in-laws watched from their seats. The distance between us suddenly measured in more than rows. "Row 5, my father-in-law said finally, words choosing caution. "Convenient. Kind," Emma corrected, not looking at him. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Somewhere, a teenager cheered quietly for Hoodie Guy in 7C. A stroller clicked into place. The espresso machine exhaled. Life resumed. Boarding line, zone number, the little anxieties that keep terminals honest. But the air had been bent. I could feel it in the space between my ribs where shame had been sitting. Not gone, just lighter. "Come on," I told Emma. The boarding group numbers glowing above us like streetlights. "Let's carry our part." The ripple of voices hadn't died down when Emma and I turned back from the counter. The new boarding passes felt hot in my hand, though the paper was cool. People at the gate weren't staring exactly. They were studying, the way strangers do when a story has just shifted and they've witnessed the turn. My in-laws sat frozen where we'd left them. My mother-in-law's smile was tight, brittle as a sugar crust that cracks too fast. My father-in-law held his watch like it had betrayed him, as though seconds weren't obeying. For once, they didn't have words ready to cut. "Row 5, Emma whispered, almost to herself. The syllables felt unreal, like stepping into a room you weren't supposed to enter. She squeezed my hand again, firmer this time. The gate agent cleared her throat at the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Boarding for Zone 1 will begin shortly." Her voice trembled just a hair before she steadied it. She looked at me once more, and her smile, tiny, private, wasn't for the crowd. It was for me. The whispering around us had grown into a hum. The man in the navy hoodie, upgraded earlier, caught my eye and gave a thumbs up, still bewildered at his luck. A woman scrolling her phone leaned toward her friend and muttered, "That's what they get for laughing." I didn't ask who she meant, but my chest knew. Emma turned to her parents. "Did you hear what he said?" Her voice wasn't sharp, just direct. "Sometimes the right seat isn't a number." My mother-in-law smoothed her scarf, eyes glittering. "Well, PR stunt or not, enjoy it while it lasts." Emma's jaw tightened. Maybe it should last. Maybe it should mean something. Her father tried to chuckle, but it came out brittle. "Row 5, not exactly first class. Closer than 32, Emma shot back, surprising even herself. Her voice wasn't loud, but the honesty in it made nearby heads swivel. The silver-haired agent pretended to busy herself with a stack of boardings, but I caught the corner of her mouth rising. The gate loudspeaker pinged again. Not with Kerr's voice this time, but with the standard boarding call. Still, people hesitated, reluctant to let the moment dissolve into routine. It wasn't just an upgrade, it was a shift, a tiny recalibration of worth, witnessed by an entire gate. I sat back down, clutching the passage. My knees still trembled. Emma leaned close. "You didn't tell me about that dad and daughter earlier," she said softly. "I didn't think it mattered." "It matters now," she said. "It mattered then, too. You just didn't know it." Across the carpet, my in-laws avoided eye contact with everyone. But avoidance doesn't hide shame, it frames it. The crowd could sense the imbalance. The before and after of arrogance deflated. That's why the gasp had lingered, not out of surprise alone, but recognition. For once, the weight on my chest wasn't humiliation. It was proof that even unnoticed kindness leaves footprints, and sometimes they lead right back to you. Zone 1 was called, and the line formed with the usual choreography. Suit jackets tugged straight, rolling bags clicking obediently behind their owners, headphones perched like crowns of entitlement. But the air around Gate 34 wasn't ordinary anymore. People kept sneaking glances at me, curious, not cruel, like they were holding on to the aftertaste of what they'd just witnessed. Emma held my hand as if to anchor me. Her parents trailed behind, their expressions stiff masks of normals. My mother-in-law clutched her handbag a little too tightly. My father-in-law marched as though punctuality could erase humiliation. When Zone 3 was called, we rose with the others. The stanchions rattled as passengers inched forward. The silver-haired gate agent caught my eye once more. "Row 5, right?" she said under her breath, almost conspiratorial. I nodded, and she winked. We walked down the jet bridge. The air was thick with recycled coolness, the walls humming with the groan of machinery. My in-laws kept a few paces ahead, eager to distance themselves. But distance doesn't erase memory. I could feel the weight of their silence pressing back at me. On board, the cabin crew smiled their practiced smiles. "Welcome," one said, scanning my new boarding pass. Her eyes flicked up, recognition sparking from whatever the agent had told her. "Row 5, bulkhead. Right this way." The seats loomed larger than expected. Extra legroom, crisp headrests, the kind of space that makes you feel noticed. Emma slid into 5C, I into 5A. I set my bag down with careful precision, as if honoring the seat itself. My in-laws filed past, their tickets clutched like losing cards. My mother-in-law's gaze darted to the row number above my head, then down to her own pass. Her lips pressed into a line so thin it nearly vanished. My father-in-law's eyes lingered a beat too long before he muttered, "Enjoy the view." Emma straightened, her voice firm but calm. "We will." Passengers behind them caught the exchange. A young man in a hoodie raised his brows at me, recognition dawning. A woman whispered, "That's him," to her seatmate, though she probably didn't know my name. Whispers carry faster than baggage carts. As the line shuffled, a man paused, a father with a little girl clinging to his sleeve. The girl's hair was wild dandelion fluff. My chest tightened. He looked at me, then down at his daughter, then back. He didn't say anything, but the nod he gave was enough. Emma reached over and rested her hand on my knee. "They can't take this from you," she said quietly. The cabin settled. Bags thumped into overhead bins. Safety cards flicked nervously in hands. But every so often, I caught another glance aimed my way. Not sharp like before, but soft, like people wanted to remember this story as they lived it. For the first time all day, the humiliation I'd carried wasn't mine alone. It had flipped, become something shared, something witnessed. My in-laws could sneer all they wanted, but the story of Gate 34 had already slipped from their control, and stories, once loose, don't go back in the box. The doors closed with that heavy metallic thud that always feels like commitment. The hum of the engines built low under the floor, a vibration that rattled the armrest. Around me, passengers settled into the rhythm of flight. Buckles clicked, headphones slid into place, seatbelts tugged tight across laps. Row 5 felt different. Space enough for knees, air that didn't smell like the restroom, the subtle reminder that comfort wasn't always for sale. Emma adjusted her seatbelt, her eyes catching mine. "You deserve this," she whispered, barely audible above the safety demo. My in-laws passed by once more, heading down the aisle toward row 32. Their faces were taut masks, performing composure but leaking bitterness in every glance. My mother-in-law brushed her scarf against the seat, as if to wipe off invisible dust. My father-in-law shook his head, muttering something that sounded like, "All for show." But no one was watching them. They were watching me. A few rows back, the Navy hoodie guy from 7C gave me another thumbs up. The mother with the oxygen concentrator smiled faintly as she powered on her device. Even the flight attendant leaned slightly as she checked seatbelts, whispering, "Glad you're here, sir." For once, the weight pressing down wasn't shame, it was visibility. Strange, raw, but lighter. As we taxied, Emma leaned closer. "They sneered at you this morning," she said, her eyes flicking toward her parents. "But now they're the ones who look small." I shook my head slowly. "It's not about them, not anymore." She studied me, then nodded. "No, it's about you, about being seen." The plane tilted, engines roaring as the runway blurred into streaks of light. My stomach lurched, but this time it wasn't just nerves, it was release. The cabin rattled, the wheels lifted, and the ground fell away. From row 32, I could almost feel my in-laws' discomfort, trapped in the tight squeeze of economy. Their laughter from earlier curdled into silence. A strange calm spread through me. They could cling to their pride, but everyone at Gate 34 had witnessed the truth. Worth isn't measured in upgrades or Rolex watches. It's measured in choices no one's watching. The seatbelt sign chimed, people shifted, screens flickered on, the hum of travel resumed, ordinary again. But under the ordinary, I carried something heavier and better. Dignity returned, not by argument, but by recognition. And when Emma laced her fingers through mine, squeezing tight, I realized the sneer had been erased, not by me shouting back, but by a room full of strangers who'd chosen to see the story differently. The seatbelt sign dimmed, and the cabin relaxed into its cruising rhythm. Screens lit up in patches of blue and white. Soda cans hissed open. The rustle of pretzel bags filled the air. Ordinary flight sounds, but beneath them, something else lingered. I could feel my in-laws behind me. Not their touch, not even their words, just the heat of their silence, pulsing like a shadow across the rows. Every so often, I caught their reflections in the darkened window as I leaned my head against the bulkhead. Stiff shoulders, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. They were still in row 32, but the distance between us was measured in more than rows. Emma shifted closer, her voice low. "Do you hear them?" "I hear the absence," I said, louder than the sneers. A passenger across the aisle, a young woman with headphones pulled to one side, leaned over. "Hey," she whispered, "I just wanted to say, what you did at the gate, it mattered. My dad once gave up his seat so I could sit with my mom. I never forgot it." Her words folded into me like a blanket. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than she could know. The flight attendant stopped by with drinks, pausing longer than usual. She placed 2 cups of water on our trays, then leaned in. "Sometimes," she said softly, "passengers remind the crew why we do this job." She smiled and moved on before I could answer. Emma looked at me with something steadier than pride. "See? People noticed, even when you didn't think anyone would." Behind us, my father-in-law cleared his throat. Loud, deliberate. My mother-in-law muttered something inaudible, then sighed dramatically, but no one turned toward them. The cabin's focus had shifted. They were background now, part of the hum of travel, not the center. I exhaled slowly. "They thought a seat number proved something," I murmured, but all it proved was how small their measure was. Emma nodded, her hand finding mine again. The hum of the engines deepened as we passed through a patch of night air. I looked down at the boarding pass still tucked in my pocket. The old one, row 32, the one I hadn't surrendered. A reminder of the sneers, but also of the turn. And I realized something. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The story had already spoken, louder than I ever could. The captain's voice broke through the hum of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Chicago. Please, fasten your seatbelts." The words pulled the passengers back from their movies and phones. Trays snapped upright, bags thudded into overhead bins, and heads tilted toward windows glowing with city lights. The skyline stretched below like 1,000 candles burning steady against the dark. I sat straighter, feeling the shift in gravity press me into the seat. Emma leaned close, whispering, "Almost there." Her fingers tightened around mine. From row 32, my in-laws sat in silence. I didn't need to see them. I could feel the weight of their quiet. They weren't sneering now, weren't laughing at my seat. They were watching from the cramped back of the plane, while row 5 carried me forward, not just in space, but in story. The wheels screeched against asphalt, a rough jolt that shook every chest at once. A ripple of applause passed through the cabin, awkward but real, as if people needed to mark the moment. I didn't clap. I just breathed, steady and sure. At the gate, as passengers rose and gathered their bags, I stayed still a moment longer. The boarding pass for row 32 was still in my pocket. I unfolded it once, stared at the faded ink, then slid it back. A reminder, not of humiliation, but of how quickly stories can turn. As we filed out, the father with the dandelion-haired girl passed me in the aisle. He glanced at me, nodded once, and whispered, "Thank you." It was enough. Emma's parents trailed us, their expressions pinched but wordless. For once, they had nothing to say, and silence, from them, was victory enough. We stepped into the jet bridge, the air cooler, brighter. The terminal buzzed with fresh travelers rushing to new gates, unaware of what had just happened at ours. But I carried it. The gasp of the crowd, the weight of recognition, the reminder that dignity isn't handed down by family name or measured in seat rows. It's proven in quiet choices, the kind no one expects you to make. Row 5 wasn't just extra space, it was perspective. And as Emma walked beside me, her hand still steady in mine, I knew the lesson had already landed. Sneers fade, but kindness echoes.